How did you take down your entire college? This unfolded during my freshman year in university, roughly 6 years ago. We had a calculus professor, Mrs. Jackson, or as she insisted we call her, Professor Jackson, despite not having a PhD. She was a nasty piece of work, both inside and out. To paint a picture of her, imagine if Miss Trunchbull from Matilda and the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland had an offspring, and that offspring was raised by the Grinch. You get Mrs. Jackson. None of the other mathematics professors could stand her, but her tenure shielded her from any potential repercussions. That was, until I found myself in her class. Her teaching style ranged from screaming at students, belittling them with petty remarks, letting us solve complex equations on our own in the middle of the class, expelling students who dared to take a quick nap, denying restroom privileges even for emergencies, and occasionally losing students' assignments and then blaming the students for not submitting them. This last habit was the one that sparked a rebellion in me. You see, I wasn't the perfect student, and my relationship with calculus was rocky at best. However, I had a knack for networking and had built relationships with everyone, students and professors alike. But Mrs. Jackson was an exception. No one could penetrate her icy exterior. I tried being friendly, but was met with a cold shoulder. I tried engaging her in small talk, only to be met with silence and icy glares. I sought her help to improve my calculation skills, and she rebuffed me, stating she had no time to assist. Midway through the semester, we were working on a complex project. Unfortunately, right after the submission deadline, Mrs. Jackson had to leave for a family emergency for a couple of weeks. We had submitted our projects both physically and through an online portal to check for plagiarism. We thought we were safe from her wrath, at least for a while. Little did we know the storm that was about to hit us. Upon her return, only half the class received their marked assignments. The rest of us waited in anticipation, thinking she would hand out the remaining assignments. But instead, she launched into a lecture about Fourier series. Several students, including myself, tried to ask about our projects, only to be met with accusations of not submitting them on time. As a result, our grades plummeted. By the end of the grading period, most of us found ourselves on the brink of failure. The worst part was, if you scored anything below a C, you were sent to a remedial class at the end of the semester. With the project carrying the bulk of our grades and only a few weeks left in the semester, half the class was on the brink of failure. Most students resigned themselves to their fate, but I had been careful. Remember how I described her teaching methods? Well, Mrs. Jackson thought that because our classroom didn't have any cameras, her actions weren't being documented. She was gravely mistaken. From the second week onwards, I started recording the classes on my phone. Each day, I captured every personal attack, every moment of her sleeping in class, and every refusal to assist me in improving my skills. Every day, I would go home and edit the recordings, keeping the incriminating parts. Each day, my collection of evidence against her grew. Also, remember how we used an online portal for submission? I coordinated with all the students who were on the brink of failure to screenshot their submission receipts and send them to me. When the hammer came down, I was ready. I scheduled a meeting with the university administration that included my parents, the dean, the head of the mathematics department, the college counselor, and Mrs. Jackson. I started the meeting by explaining how she had lost half the class's projects and how many of us were on the brink of failing due to her mistake. As expected, she denied it and accused us of turning in our projects late and even resorted to claims of academic dishonesty. I stayed calm, pulled out a folder containing all the screenshots of our online submissions from my bag, and handed it to the dean. It was then passed to the head of the mathematics department, who asked Mrs. Jackson to explain herself. She turned beet red and began to stutter, but before she could form a coherent sentence, I played the highlights of the semester's recordings from my phone. There was a tense silence in the room as the audio unfolded Mrs. Jackson's true nature. After the audio finished, the dean looked at me and said, "I think we've seen enough," and asked me to leave the room. I stepped outside, savoring the muffled sounds of the heated discussion through the conference room walls. The meeting took place on a Thursday. When I walked into class the following Monday, Mrs. Jackson's desk was empty, and a beloved substitute teacher had taken her place. It was a victory for all of us. It proved that standing up against injustice can lead to change, no matter how formidable the adversary may seem. What is the most shocking thing someone has done in your house that they thought was normal? A boss told me, similar to Ruth Harvey's story, that they had visitors who let their young daughter roam naked and let go wherever she happened to be when the urge hit. This was a couple who were friends of his wife and she'd been friends ever since undergrad days. My boss and his wife had visited their home a few times before they had a daughter and vice versa. In his opinion, they defined the wild-eyed far-left Californian and he never enjoyed the visits. High's own wife was more conservative than her friends, but it would often be 3-on-1 no matter what the topic was. He knew nothing about sport because contact sports are barbaric, they both favored full-on socialism and so on. But then they had the child, so there hadn't been any visits in a few years. Until one day when my boss's wife said they'd be in the area. Wouldn't it be great to get together? She also hinted that maybe he could overlook their very liberal views and crank up the grill if things weren't going too badly. They arrive and the daughter, about 3.5, is naked within minutes. My boss starts to say something when the other wife, the mom, says that they're raising their daughter to love her body and all three are often fully nude around their own house. My boss says something to the effect of, "Do you think it's a good idea?" when the other guy jumps all over him. That's why women are so put down. All most men think about is sex. How could you even think of sexualizing a 3-year-old? It's exactly that attitude we're trying to break here. She has no problem with her body, so it must be you. Clearly, he would not be cranking up the grill. Unfortunately, His own wife had never asked them to stay for dinner. He guessed he could survive another hour or so when the girl let go all over the hardwood floor in the dining room. She peed, she pooped, and then she peed more, and then just walked away. Meanwhile, her parents, who saw the whole thing, continued on with their conversation. When it became clear that they weren't going to budge, he got up to clean up the mess. That's when both parents yelled out Don, not his real name, "Sit down right now. We are not going to have our daughter taught that natural bodily functions are dirty or bad." Now he'd had enough, so seeing that, his wife pulled him aside. He made clear that they were leaving right now, that they were going to pay to have the floor refinished. He never wanted to see or hear about them again, and he had half a mind at least to call Child Protective. Evidently, the other couple sensed what was coming and so loudly said to the daughter, "We'd better leave now. These are not very nice people and we are better off without people like that around us." They did eventually send a check to have the floor fixed, and he never called CPS. What disturbing rumor turned out to be true at your school? When I was a senior in high school, we had a new teacher join the faculty to teach health and home economics. She was probably about 26 years old and very, very attractive. Everyone was talking about the hot new teacher. As I was senior class president, I needed a new faculty advisor since my previous advisor of 3 years retired at the end of my junior year. About 2 weeks later, the principal called me into his office and informed me that the new hot teacher was going to be our new class advisor for the rest of the year. As a result, she and I spent a lot of time together, at school and off campus, organizing and running myriad events to raise money for the class, plan the prom, field trips, etc. Soon, the rumors started flying around that she and I were messing around. This was completely false. I can say she never acted inappropriately towards me or suggested anything to make me think she had plans for any type of physical or sexual activity. She was a fantastic advisor and always just that, a class advisor. I spent the rest of the year denying these rumors with friends, with teachers, and with parents. I was even interrogated by my wrestling coach the day before the district championship match. She and I had a laugh about it at graduation, as she had to face similar questions from other faculty as well as the principal. She confided in me that she had tendered her resignation, but the principal would not accept it and said he believed her and would ensure the rumor was squashed. So I graduated and left for my plebe year at West Point, forgetting about the entire situation. At West Point, the first year is called plebe year rather than freshman year. The first semester of my plebe year was moving along as it should, with no unusual events worth mentioning until the final month. Then, in early December, the topic of my high school faculty advisor resurfaced. One night when I was studying, there was a knock on my door and the company tactical officer, a regular Army captain, walked in and told me to report to his office immediately as there was a phone call for me from the Dover Police Department. Now, I immediately assumed it was my brother playing some kind of twisted joke on me, since he was a captain in the very same police department waiting for me on the phone. Since my TAC was standing right behind me, I answered the phone as we were taught. "Cadet Kerwick speaking. How may I help you, sir/ma'am?" I immediately recognized the voice on the other end. It was not my brother, but a close friend I had grown up with and known for over 15 years. He said, "Hey Steve, hope things are going well there, but I don't have time to chit-chat. I need to record this call and ask you some questions. Do you consent to being recorded, and will you allow me to swear you in so that this is official, and if anything you say is later proven to be false or misleading, you may be subject to criminal charges and a warrant issued for your arrest?" His name was Bill, but we all called him Woody. I said, "Woody, is this some kind of a joke? Who put you up to this? Because I'm about to shit my pants, as I have no idea what this is about." My mind was racing so fast, trying to guess, counter-guess, and trying to process that I could potentially be kicked out of West Point for something I had no clue about as of that moment. Woody replied, "It's no joke, and this is a very serious case we are investigating concerning inappropriate behavior between an adult and a minor or minors with regard to possible consensual or non-consensual sexual activities or sexual assault." That's when I knew exactly what this was about. I said, "Go ahead, Woody, I consent and will answer any questions you have." So I basically had to repeat his words, almost like being sworn in as a witness who was going to testify in court. The questions all focused on that hot, young class advisor I worked with during my senior year. They kept me on the phone for an hour asking every possible question imaginable and then asking those same questions again in a different way. I answered every one honestly and candidly, but at the 1 hour mark I was becoming agitated, as it seemed like they were on a witch hunt and were going to keep asking questions until they got an answer they liked. So I spoke up and said, "Gentlemen, you can continue to ask me these questions in any order or format that you desire, but I can assure you that my answers will not change because they are truthful, and there was never one moment where Ms. X acted inappropriately in front of me. She was always completely professional and never even insinuated at something that would cross the line between teacher and student." Following that statement, they had no further questions and told me they would contact me again if they needed to follow up or get additional details. My TAC could see I was visibly shaken, so we talked for another hour and I told him everything about the situation. He never had to ask me if I was being truthful because every cadet adheres to a strict honor code that becomes part of who we are. That code states that a cadet shall not lie, cheat or steal, nor tolerate those who do. He told me that I handled things professionally and can hold my head high if I ever return home for a visit. And that was that. I went back to my studies and prepared for my final exams and went home for a short Christmas break. That's when I found out that my teacher, my class advisor, had been found guilty of having a relationship with someone in the current senior class. That relationship was sexual and he was a minor. Seems the student ran around bragging to everyone that he was doing it with the hot teacher. I don't know if it was true or if he made it up. What was true was that she was fired from her job and never allowed to teach again. She had to register as a SX offender for the rest of her life. She lost everything: family, friends, money, possessions, and had to serve time as an inmate in a state correctional facility. If you ask me what I think, I don't believe it. I know the kid who was allegedly in a relationship with her. He was a complete jerk. Loud mouth, not smart, not smooth, not good looking, and most of all, he was a liar and a storyteller who would say anything if he thought it would make him look cool. I had wished I could have tracked him down and interrogated him my way. My guess is things might have ended differently, but I never got the chance to run into him and the cards he laid were played.